Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc spent 2 intense days in track testing at the 5.412-kilometer Bahrain International Circuit in Sakhir. A lot of scheduled work was successfully completed in all aspects, as far as we know. Apart from the rain, which was a bit of a nuisance for both drivers, the tests provided the team with a wealth of important information, a large amount of data to process, extremely useful for assessing the various characteristics of the Ferrari and defining the distinctive traits of the car. This was the plan, to outline the aerodynamic map and establish the boundaries of the setup. Within this competitive scenario, we can conduct a first analysis regarding driving styles and other interesting parameters, helping us better understand the preferences of the two drivers at the wheel of the Ferrari SF25. All of this is made possible thanks to the invaluable support of telemetry. This is a truly effective tool that, when used to perfection, allows us in this specific case to examine the conduct and approach of Ferrari's two drivers. Let's therefore begin with a direct comparison between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, analyzing their fastest laps in the Italian car on the second day of pre-season testing in Bahrain. First of all, there is a suspicion regarding the setup, as it appears that Charles Leclerc had a more aerodynamically loaded configuration. We can infer this from the top speeds and also from how he navigates the snake in Sector 1. The Monegasque driver tackles this section more smoothly, even going flat out in corners 6 and 7, highlighting both the SF25's effectiveness in direction changes and the confidence he had in completing this sequence. In the first 3 corners, however, the Englishman's behavior is decisively better from his use of the pedals. We notice that he is slightly more aggressive than Charles Leclerc getting on the throttle earlier. In this section alone, he gains 0.072 seconds. The remaining advantage built by the Briton in the first sector comes from turn 4, which generally induces oversteer on exit. Here, Charles Leclerc struggled more than Lewis Hamilton throughout the session, including on his fastest lap. Despite being able to carry more minimum speed through the center of the corner, the former Alfa Romeo driver has to delay full throttle until his wheels are completely straight. Over the course of the lap, we observed that the Monegasque was almost always faster in minimum cornering speeds. One of the reasons is simple. He uses the brake pedal less to slow down, relying more on engine braking. He does this while still managing to give the car the right rotation. On the contrary, in general, Lewis Hamilton tends to carry more speed at the end of the straights, trying to brake as late as possible. This approach sometimes forces him to use the left pedal more than necessary to avoid understeer. As the lap continues, both Ferrari drivers were flawless in turn 13, where the SF25 struggled on Wednesday, mainly due to extreme setups. Lewis Hamilton himself confirmed this, as the engineers needed to understand the car's limits to define the aerodynamic map. On the second day of testing, the front of the Ferrari was very sharp, allowing it to hit the apex precisely, with the rear following smoothly without any signs of instability. Additionally, once again, we can appreciate Charles Leclerc's preferred technique, trailing throttle. From what we have seen, he is the only driver on the entire grid who uses it, as it is very difficult to execute effectively. In the analyzed lap, Charles Leclerc keeps a slight amount of throttle open even while cornering. The reason remains the same: balancing the car's weight, shifting it from the front to the rear, and consequently putting down all the power from the 06615 power unit sooner. The fact that the Monegasque driver uses this technique is a positive sign, as it proves that the SF25's front end holds up well despite the weight transfer toward the rear axle. Ferrari has therefore worked hard with Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc to pursue its ambitions. By now, we know very well the goal of the prancing horse, fighting for both Formula One world titles in the 2025 championship. No one is hiding it. Both the Maranello team and the drivers have reiterated it. Team principal Frederic Vasseur is at the helm of a renewed team with an intense desire to return to success. The Italian side's two drivers are no different. They are driven by different motivations. On one side, there's the Monegasque, who, at 27 years old and after 6 seasons with the Maranello team, is determined to become world champion. On the other side, there's the Briton. He has already won 7 championships, equaling Michael Schumacher's record. At over 40 years old, he has taken on a new challenge to claim his 8th title, aiming to become the most successful driver in history. Achieving this with Ferrari, a team that has not won anything in nearly 17 years, would cement his place in the legend of the most important Formula One team, making him a sort of national hero who restores joy to Maranello after more than a decade and a half of waiting. A comparison between Charles Leclerc's best lap in the second session of 2025 testing and his best lap from last year's preseason tests in Sakhir with the SF24 gives us a first glimpse of how much progress the new Ferrari has made. Improvements in the setup of a car that is 99% new, as Frederick Vasseur himself emphasized well in advance. The most significant step forward made by Ferrari is immediately apparent when analyzing our telemetry comparison. It is found in the snake section, referring to the fast sequence in the second sector comprising turns 5, 6, and 7. The SF25's mid-corner speed difference is truly remarkable. It is 14 km per hour faster in turn 6 and an impressive 16 km per hour faster in turn 7. The most interesting aspect is that Maranello's latest aeromechanical creation can go full throttle several meters earlier, and, as if that were not enough, manages to take this section of the Middle Eastern circuit flat out without any liftoff. In general, when observing the telemetry data collected from Thursday at the Bahrain circuit, it is evident that in every corner, the minimum speeds favor the Ferrari SF25 single-seater. The same applies to the acceleration phase, where the 2025 Formula One car can get on the throttle much earlier, demonstrating the team's progress in terms of traction as well. From the speed curve trends, it appears that the power unit was not operating at its full potential, as it does not unleash all its power at the end of the straights, with a flattening of top speed in the final meters before braking. This is particularly noticeable before turn 11 and turn 14. The additional data gathered from the second day of F1 testing in Bahrain compares the average speed over a lap with the average between top and minimum speed. This further confirms that Ferrari worked extensively yesterday on fine-tuning the car's balance. The reasons for this are quite clear: extracting the maximum performance from the SF25, both in qualifying configuration and in race simulation, where they simulated a 300-kilometer stint with a high fuel load on board. The results in push laps are more than evident. As for race pace, it cannot be said that Ferrari's handling was poor. On the contrary, the car was composed and relatively neutral. However, as highlighted in one of yesterday's analysis, Ferrari simulated a Grand Prix scenario where McLaren appeared clearly more prepared at this stage of the preseason period. The lap times of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were not on par with McLaren's, which also showed greater consistency over multiple laps. But of course, we should point out that this observation is just an initial indication that requires further confirmation, as fuel loads were unknown, as were the engine and hybrid system mappings. We wait for the data from the final day of testing for more details, but the true potential of the cars will only be seen in the first round of the 2025 Formula One season.